The plane had just landed in Burkina Faso, and the sun was setting, painting the sky with orange and purple colors. As the door of the plane opened, a long black car waited outside with flags on the front and shiny guards standing tall. Everyone inside the airplane looked out the window, confused. "Who was that car waiting for?" someone whispered. Inside the plane, a young man in plain clothes stood up slowly. His jacket was simple, his shoes were dusty, and he carried only a small backpack. Most people hadn't even noticed him during the flight. But when he stepped toward the door, the flight attendants gasped. Soldiers in dark uniforms saluted him. One bowed and said, "Welcome back, Mr. President." The air inside the plane froze. Clarice, the lead flight attendant, dropped the glass she was holding. Just 2 hours earlier, she had shouted at that same man, thinking he was just a poor traveler who didn't belong in business class. She had told him rudely, "This seat is not for people like you. Move to the back now, or I will call security." She had even waved her hand in front of his face and rolled her eyes. But now, she saw the truth. The man she disrespected was Ibrahim Traore, the president of Burkina Faso. Her face turned pale. She couldn't speak. She looked at him with wide eyes, mouth open, her whole body shaking. He paused for a moment and looked at her. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. And then, he said something she would never forget. What did he say? What would happen to Clarice now? To understand that moment, we have to go back a little, to the beginning of the story. Just a few days before the flight, President Ibrahim Traore had been traveling in Europe for meetings. He hated attention. He didn't like riding in gold-colored cars or having people open doors for him. He believed a leader should live like the people, not above them. So, for his return home, he decided to fly like a normal person. No private jets. No fancy clothes. No special treatment. Just a regular ticket on a commercial flight. His advisors warned him, "Mr. President, this is not safe. What if someone doesn't treat you well?" But he smiled and said, "If I can't walk among my people or sit beside them, I do not deserve to lead them." So he booked a business class ticket under a fake name and wore regular clothes, nothing shiny or expensive. On the day of the flight, he arrived at the airport early. He went through security like everyone else. He stood in line. He waited patiently. Nobody recognized him. When he got on the plane, he quietly sat in his seat and took out a small book to read. The seat next to him was empty, and he looked peaceful, like someone who enjoyed being left alone. But not everyone liked what they saw. Clarice, the flight attendant in charge of business class, noticed him and frowned. "Who is that?" she whispered to her coworker. "He looks out of place." Her coworker shrugged. "He has a valid ticket. Let him be." But Clarice didn't let it go. A few minutes later, a rich French businessman came up the aisle. His name was Mr. Lemoyne, and he looked very annoyed. "Excuse me," he said loudly. "I was promised a window seat in business class. That's where I always sit." Clarice checked the seat list and saw that the president's seat had indeed been requested by Mr. Lemoyne's assistant, hoping to switch at last minute. "Don't worry, sir," Clarice said with a fake smile. "I'll take care of it." She marched down the aisle and stopped in front of Ibrahim. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "This seat is needed. Please move to economy. There's a spot for you back there." Ibrahim looked up and smiled kindly. "I paid for this seat," he said calmly, "and I'd like to stay." Clarice folded her arms. "Look, sir, let's not make this difficult. You don't look like someone who belongs here. Please move." Passengers around them began to stare. Ibrahim looked around, not wanting to cause a scene. "Please, miss," he said softly. "I'm comfortable here." Clarice grew angry. "Enough. If you don't move, I'll call the airport security. Do you even have a real ticket?" "I do," he said, showing her his boarding pass. Clarice didn't even look at it. "I don't care. You're going to economy." And then she did the unthinkable. She reached out and grabbed his backpack from under the seat and placed it in the aisle. "Move now," she ordered. Ibrahim stood up, took the bag, and without another word, walked toward the back of the plane. Some passengers looked away, embarrassed. Others whispered things like, "That was harsh," or "She didn't need to act like that." One older woman shook her head. "She'll regret that," she whispered to her husband. Back in economy class, Ibrahim sat quietly in a cramped seat, knees pressed against the seat in front of him. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for special treatment. He just closed his eyes and rested. But something was already happening. A young man, sitting nearby, had recognized him. He nudged his friend and whispered, Isn't that the president? His friend stared. No way is it. They didn't say anything out loud, but they took pictures on their phones, trying to be secretive. Then, they posted them online. President Traore on our flight? The caption read. Move to economy? The post spread like wildfire. By the time the plane was halfway to Burkina Faso, thousands of people had seen the post. Reporters were calling the airline. The news was spreading fast. The president was on a regular flight, and he had been insulted by a flight attendant. Inside the cockpit, the pilot got a message on the radio. Are you carrying President Traore? The voice asked. The pilot turned pale. Yes, he's in the cabin. Prepare a presidential welcome. He's not just any passenger. The pilot sent a message to the crew. The flight attendants started to panic. Clarice was confused. Why is everyone acting weird? She asked. Her manager came to her with wide eyes. You kicked the president out of his seat. Clarice laughed. Very funny. I'm not joking, he said. You told President Ibrahim Traore to move to economy. And now the entire country knows. Clarice's heart stopped. She turned slowly to look down the aisle where Ibrahim was sitting. He was still calm, still quiet, just like before. But now, everyone knew who he was. She felt sick. The plane began to land. On the ground, cameras were waiting. The president's guards were waiting. The president's car was waiting. Everyone was waiting, except Clarice, who wished the ground would just open and swallow her. And then it happened. As Ibrahim stepped off the plane, surrounded by guards and flashing cameras, he stopped at the top of the stairs. Slowly, he turned around and looked at Clarice, who had come to the door, shaking. He looked her right in the eye, and then he spoke. Clarice couldn't breathe. The world around her seemed to disappear. She stood frozen by the airplane door, facing Ibrahim Traore, the president of Burkina Faso. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Passengers behind her leaned forward, curious. Flight attendants peered from behind the curtain. The president stared at her for what felt like forever. Then he finally spoke. Next time, Ibrahim said in a calm voice, judge people by their actions, not their clothes. His voice wasn't angry. It was firm, controlled, almost gentle. But those words hit Clarice like a thunderstorm. She opened her mouth to say something, to explain, maybe even apologize, but nothing came out. Ibrahim gave her one last look and walked down the stairs toward the red carpet that had been rolled out for him. Soldiers saluted. Officials bowed. News cameras flashed. Clarice stood there, her hands trembling. She felt the eyes of everyone on her. Shame burned through her like fire. As the doors of the plane closed behind the last passenger, she slowly turned around and walked back inside. No one said a word. Even her co-workers, who had gossiped with her earlier, now avoided her eyes. The entire crew had heard the truth. Everyone knew what had happened. Back at the airline headquarters, things were even worse. Videos of the president being pushed to economy had gone viral. People from around the world were commenting. How could she treat him like that? He's the kindest leader. She should be fired. Clarice's name hadn't been released yet, but people were demanding answers. The airline was in a panic. Managers were called. Executives held emergency meetings. And soon, Clarice got the message that she had to report to the office immediately. She walked in with her head down, wearing her flight uniform. Her manager, Mr. Russell, sat behind a big desk, looking serious. There was a long silence before he spoke. Clarice, he said, folding his hands. Do you know why you're here? She nodded slowly. Yes, sir. He sighed. The president of a country sat on one of our flights. Instead of treating him with respect, you embarrassed him in front of other passengers. Do you have anything to say? Clarice's voice was small. I didn't know who he was. That's not the point, Mr. Russell said firmly. You don't need to know someone's title to treat them with dignity. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't mean to be rude. I just thought. You thought wrong, he interrupted. And now the world is watching. Clarice tried to speak again, but he raised a hand. We have no choice but to suspend you while we investigate. She felt like the floor was falling under her feet. Suspend me? Yes. Effective immediately. As she walked out of the office, everything felt like a bad dream. People whispered as she passed by. She could feel their eyes on her. Some even stopped talking when she entered the hallway. Clarice had always been proud of her job. She loved flying, meeting new people, helping passengers. But now, she was known for something else, disrespecting a leader who had done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, across the city, something else was happening. President Ibrahim Traore sat at a long table with his advisors. News of the incident had reached every corner of the country. Reporters were begging for interviews. Foreign leaders were calling to express surprise and support. But Ibrahim wasn't angry. In fact, he looked thoughtful. "Sir," one advisor said, "we need to make a statement." "About what?" Ibrahim asked. "About the flight. The insult. The way you were treated. People are furious on your behalf." He shook his head. "Let them be. I have no interest in revenge or making someone a villain." "But sir," another advisor said, "she embarrassed you." Ibrahim leaned back in his chair. "What would it prove if I punished someone for judging a man by his clothes? People already saw what happened. Let them learn from it. The real lesson isn't about me. It's about how we treat people we think are beneath us." His advisors nodded slowly. They knew he meant every word. Back in her small apartment, Clarice sat on the couch, hugging a pillow. Her phone buzzed nonstop, news updates, texts from friends, emails from strangers. She hadn't turned on the TV in hours. The few times she had, she saw her picture being shown as the flight attendant who shamed the president. Some people called her heartless. Others said she was unfair. A few even said she should never work again. But she couldn't stop thinking about his face. How calm he had been, how kind his voice was, even after she had treated him badly. She kept replaying the moment when he looked her in the eye and told her to judge people by their actions. She thought about her own actions, her behavior, her words. Why had she assumed he didn't belong in business class? Was it his dusty shoes? His quiet way of speaking? The simple clothes? Why had she been so sure he was just another poor passenger trying to sneak into a seat he hadn't paid for? For the first time in a long while, she began to question everything about herself. The next day, she decided to write a letter. Not a public letter. A private one, addressed directly to President Traore. In it, she apologized, not just for what she did, but for the way she thought. She told him how ashamed she felt, how sorry she was, how much she had learned. She didn't know if he would ever read it. She mailed the letter and went home. That night, she didn't sleep, but she felt lighter, just a little. 3 days later, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, a tall man in a black suit stood there. He handed her a white envelope. "What is this?" she asked. A personal response from President Ibrahim Traore. Her hands shook as she took it. She opened it slowly, unfolded the note inside, and began to read. And what she read would change her life forever. Clarice held the letter in her hands for several minutes before unfolding it. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what to expect. Would it be angry? Cold? Forgiving? Her fingers trembled as she opened it, her eyes quickly scanning the neatly written words. "Dear Clarice," it began, "I received your letter, and I want to thank you for the courage it took to write it. Most people would have walked away and pretended it never happened. But you didn't. You chose to face it, and that speaks louder than your mistake." Clarice's lips parted as her eyes widened. "I know what it feels like to be judged unfairly," the letter continued. "I've been looked down on because of my background, my choices, even my appearance. But I learned long ago that respect doesn't come from how loud you speak. It comes from how deeply you understand. Your words in the letter showed that understanding." She paused, holding the letter to her chest for a moment before continuing. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next. You chose to reflect, to grow, to say sorry. That means more to me than any public apology ever could. I hope this experience teaches others what it taught you, that everyone deserves kindness, no matter what they wear, where they sit, or where they come from." The letter ended simply, "With respect and peace. Ibrahim Traore, President of Burkina Faso." Tears streamed down Clarice's face. It was the first time she cried not from shame, but from something close to hope. She felt seen, not just for her mistake, but for her effort to make it right. That moment changed her. The words became a kind of fuel, pushing her to be better, to think deeper, to treat everyone with the grace she had once failed to show. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The airline called her again, this time not with a suspension, but with an offer. Her suspension had ended early. President Traore had personally called the airline's board to say he forgave her, and that he believed people should be given a second chance. Clarice was shocked. The president had stood up for her. The very man she had mistreated now defended her. But that wasn't the end of the surprise. When she returned to the airline headquarters, she was called into a large meeting room. A press team was there, along with some executives and a few journalists. Mr. Russell, the manager who had earlier suspended her, looked at her and gave a small nod. "We've decided," he began, "that this story isn't just about a mistake, it's about growth and grace." He handed Clarice a microphone. "Tell your story." She took it, her hands sweaty, her heart racing. Cameras rolled. The room was quiet, and she began to speak. She told them everything. How she had judged a man by his appearance, how she pushed him to economy, how she found out he was a president, and how she felt the crushing weight of regret afterward. But then she spoke of what came after, the letter, the reflection, the forgiveness. The room was silent. When she finished, there was a long pause. Then, people began to clap. The story hit the news again, but this time, in a different light. Headlines changed. Flight attendant learns powerful lesson after disrespecting president. Others read, Ibrahim Traore forgives with grace, inspires millions. The video of Clarice telling her story went viral. Emails poured in, not with hate, but with support. Other flight attendants shared their own stories of learning hard lessons. Teachers played the video in classrooms. A charity group even reached out, offering Clarice a chance to speak to young people about respect and kindness. But the most unexpected invitation of all came 2 weeks later. Clarice received a call from the Burkina Faso embassy. "President Traore is visiting the United Nations," the woman on the line said. "He'd like to invite you to a private dinner during his visit." Clarice almost dropped the phone. "Me? Yes." He said he wants to meet the woman who showed the world how to turn a mistake into a message. The day of the dinner arrived. Clarice wore a simple navy dress and minimal makeup. She didn't want to impress anyone. She just wanted to be real. When she arrived at the hotel, she was escorted to a quiet room, where a few dignitaries sat at a long table. And there, at the center, was Ibrahim Traore. He stood when he saw her and offered his hand. "Clarice, it's good to see you again." She shook his hand, her voice shaky. "Thank you for everything." He smiled warmly. "Thank you for being brave." They sat, and the dinner began. It wasn't fancy or loud. It was calm, respectful. Clarice listened as President Traore spoke about leadership, humility, and the power of perception. He didn't talk about her mistake. He talked about what people could learn from it. At one point during the evening, he turned to her and said something that stayed with her forever. "Sometimes, the world teaches us its biggest lessons in the smallest moments." A seat on a plane, a conversation, a choice to pause instead of judge. Clarice nodded, her heart full. When she returned home that night, she knew something had shifted in her forever. Her story had become a symbol, not just of regret, but of redemption. Not of shame, but of strength. And while the world might always remember what happened on that flight, Clarice knew they'd also remember what came after. The mistake, the realization, the forgiveness, and the change. She had started as a flight attendant, known for one terrible decision. But now, she was something else too. A storyteller, a speaker, a living example of how a moment of disrespect could become a lifetime of wisdom. And as she turned off her lamp that night, she smiled softly to herself. Because sometimes, a journey begins not when you take off, but when you fall and choose to rise.